What's going on, everybody? My name is Victor. I'm a UX designer, and today I'm going to give you an in-depth look at how to build a design system using Sketch from beginning to end. For those of you who are not familiar with what a design system is, I strongly advise you go and check out the book by Brad Frost, Atomic Design, give you a full overview of what the design system is conceptually and in a dev world. But for us, we're going to be using the design system in Sketch. Not so much code, but more on the design side of things. But a lot of the steps that we're going to be going over are going to talk about how to communicate your design to a developer and how to get that mock-up or that prototype into a fully functioning user interface. So let's jump over to our Sketch file and talk about what we're going to be reviewing. So this is the end result that we're going for. We have header menu, which is a stacked menu. We have, we have a mega menu here. We have a slider with some navigational arrows, some slide indicators, thumbnails, inputs, text containers, dividers, and a whole list of things. This is actually one of my favorite builds recently, which is a testimonial page, testimonial component. And you can see one of the things to point out, these slide indicators are the exact same slide indicators up here with one small difference. Notice how these are white, these inactive ones, and these inactive ones are gray. I'll give you an example of what I was talking about. This whole component is comprised of multiple smaller pieces, and if I go over here to the right, we'll find this molecules indicator, dark and light. I'll switch that over to light. Boom, you have a light version. That in itself is a time saver. Instead of having just drawn it on a page and then going in and saying, I need this to be white, and clicking on each one of them and changing it to white. If you imagine you have this component on 50 pages, well then I'm going to show you how to make an adjustment that's global from a library, component library, that will adjust across multiple projects and multiple pages. So let's dive into the actual themable library. One last thing to mention, we will be talking about how to make these responsive, so as responsive as they can be, so that they can fit on tablet and desktop. So this component and this component, they're the exact same, but they scale. You see that? Everything stays centered where it's supposed to. This stays where it's supposed to. This navigational arrow stays aligned to the left. This one stays aligned to the right. And that allows you to build mockups even faster for multiple devices. So let's jump into the library. This is the library, what is composed of atoms, molecules, and organisms. Again, check out Brad Frost's design system book called Atomic Design. You can read it for free online. I'll include the link below. So let me just give you a quick overview. Atoms are the smallest items. They can't live on their own. They can't do anything. This is an example of one. You have icons. You have text, content containers. So text containers, you can't see anything in there, but I'm going to fill this with a color so you can just see what it is that you're looking at. So you can see red. So this is just a container. That's what's going to store your content. I'll show you how to use those during this process. We have thumbnails and so on, logo containers and so on. We have molecules, which is slightly more complex, using atoms. The last thing we have are the organisms. Organisms are the most complex. So here we'll be looking at the menu as one of those items. This consists of tabs, tab groups, which is all of them put together, the containers in the back, buttons, logo containers, and icons. I believe this even has a divider line. Yes, it does. So all of these different components create your library. So the first thing we're going to be doing in this build is our foundational layer. What that means is all of the crucial elements that will be used in every single piece of the document or the system is going to be here. So the styles are essentially things like filter overlays. I'm going to just show you here. Filter overlays. You can see this has a blur effect. This has a blur with too close. Blur background with a color overlay with no blur, and then a light color overlay with no blur. So those are some of the filters we're going to be building today. We're going to be working with shadows. You can see there's a slight shadow around here. I like to keep the opacity really, really light. When it's in the context of other elements around it, you can see it's just giving it a little bit of depth from the other elements, kind of a z-index indicator for your user. We have your colors, both solid colors and our variations of those. Then we have our outlines, and of course, possibly most importantly, our typography. This is really crucial when you have a number of pages and you have to change the header size. This is going to be your source of truth. So you change it here and it'll change across every document and every project. So let's start with building our filters. The first thing we need to do is decide what we want them to be. In this case, I'm going to go to a shape, create a shape. It can be any shape you want it to be, because this won't be taking into consideration the shape itself. It's going to be taking into consideration all the options that are underneath style. So you remove the fill, remove the border, that's a style, and you would save it that way. Or if you want just the border, that's your style, and you save it that way. In this case, we don't want anything on here. All we want is a blur, a background blur, and we're going to set this to 3. Now, it's kind of difficult to determine what you did. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to cut this. Come up here, grab this layer, duplicate it down here, and paste that back in. I picked this image specifically so you can see the horizon of the image and see how much blur is being applied. So we can apply more or less. I prefer some blur just enough to where you can determine what that image is. You can't see the details of it. If it becomes too blurry, it's really just becoming more of a gradient, a custom gradient. So I don't like it to be that far. There you go. So now that we've got our shape and the style attributes applied to it, we need to give it a name. The way the naming structure works is whenever you have a series of letters and then you put a slash after and then another series of letters, it essentially creates new folders for each one of those. So if you look over here, in our current location of our filter, we have it under our colors folder. I'm sorry, under our filters. So I will name it filter/blur/default. You can see default, you can't see it because there's no color applied to it. So we're going to go over here, create filter/blur/default. Just hit enter. So what you'll see is I have another one here. I probably should have added test after it. And it's exactly the same. So just notice that this is the second one here. I'm going to go in, I'm going to grab a shape. I'm going to grab a rectangle. I'm just going to place it here. And it comes with this default set of styles. The default set of styles are with a gray outline and a slight gray solid fill. I'm going to go into this document. I'm going to go into my filters, which I had on the first part of that name, filters/blur/default. I'll go to the second one that we just created, and there you go. You see the shape was not acknowledged because you created the shape. You determined that when you created it on the board, but now that filter has been created. So the next thing we need to do is I'm going to copy this over, and what we're going to do is add a fill. And the color that we're going to choose, you can choose any color. Matter of fact, for this, what we're going to do is not pick the exact color that I used, but we're going to go and pick a gradient. We're going to make this, we're going to make that 80%, and we're going to make this one 40%. Let's go a little more, actually. And we'll take this one down a little bit more as well. So now, in our styles, we have a combination of fill, and we have background blur applied. Create a new style, and you can see that it has the name that we had in there before, filter, blur, default, but it adds a 2 in there because it recognizes that this already exists. So that's the way of differentiating the two. But because we have this, we're going to change the name to our dark. There we go. Delete this one we just accidentally created. So now we have this filter here. So I can go to this one with the other settings, go into my styles that are similar. It gives you them all in this kind of compartmentalized area so you can quickly get them. And I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want that to be transparent anymore. I want it to be dark. So we change it to dark. They're both dark. Same thing over here. You can change this one to be the default blur. So the last one that we have, I believe, let's see, we have 2 more. We have the color and the light gradient. So I'm just going to back up here. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to remove the background blurs. I'm just going to throw that away. Now you see we have a gradient. I'm going to go over here and go to, this is non-blurred in this category, and then also we're going to change it to dark. So I thought I had non-blurred, and then we'll create that. I'm going to actually call this test. Alright, so now we have filter, non-blurred, dark test. And the last one we have is just a white. So we can still do the gradient if we want, but in this case we're going to switch it to solid, go to white, change the opacity down to 80. And so there we go. So we're going to save that as a new one. This is non-blurred and light. So we save that. Sorry, I'm not sure. Non-blurred and light. And we'll do the test. Enter. Now you see we have over here our dark test, our light test. Go over here. We can just go to, oh, I'm sorry, that's blurred. We can stay in the same folder. Light test. There you go. Now everything is interchangeable. So now we have all these new styles, and I'm not going to leave them in here because I want to keep my document clean. But at the end result, you should have something that looks along the lines of this: your filter, your blur, your dark, default, and light. This is my preference. Your non-blurred, so you would name it filter, non-blurred, dark, default, and light. And you just set your different styles for each one. So we'll go back to the final product. You can see we have default blur, color 1 blur, color 1 non-blur, and light non-blur. The next item we have is going to be our shadows. Now this will go a lot faster because this is very similar to what we just did before, except you're just picking different attributes. So I'm going to just delete this, and I'm going to get our shape here, create that. I'm going to remove the fill and remove the borders, and I'm going to go to my shadows, and you just pick your different, I'm sorry, actually it's better to have the fill on so you can see what you're doing. I'm going to change this to white, and I'm going to pick my settings that I prefer. So I like to have multiple settings. Just 3 shadows is enough for me. It's kind of like when you're picking colors for a brand, 2 to 3 max. That's all you need. So I'm going to remove all attributes, and we'll go over to our shadow names so you can see the same thing that you'll be doing on the other one. We'll get to shadow and none. So all we do for our name is shadow slash none. So create shadow slash none. And then I'm going to give this test so we can see the difference. All right. None slash test. I'm going to bring this over here. We're just going to make up some settings here. You can make these whatever you want. All right. We're going to make the blur just slight. I'm going to add the color of our shadow is black, and we're going to make this alpha 40. And we're going to create a name. I'm going to say over here, shadow 1. So this will be shadow 1 dash test. All right. And then I'll speed through and show you the other ones. All right, so now you can see we have none, shadow 1, shadow 2, and shadow 3. So now that we have these here, change the size a little bit. The one thing you do need to pay attention to, possibly, if you don't want that white background, you may want to go back in, change the color, and update. Because the reason we had the solid fill, because that's part of your style that you saved, is because we needed to see how far away the shadow was from the shape. In this case, we no longer need that, so we're going to remove it and update. Remove it and update. And then remove it and update. So what makes this really cool is that if I go into rectangle and create that rectangle just like before, it's not a circle, and I want to give this a shadow. I'm going to go into layer, this document, shadow, and shadow 3 test. Now you notice the square is gone. That's what I'm talking about, where we need to have multiple layers. So let's go back and try this again. I want this square to look like it does currently. Zoom in a little bit here. I want this square to look like this, so I'm going to copy it and paste it. It doesn't look like anything happened, but you can see there's 2 of them. So now, grab this layer. I'm going to go over to my layer style, this document, shadow, and do shadow test 3. I'm going to bring this back over so they align. And this is how you'll create them. Now you'll see what I mean here by if these were put into a symbol where the layers were already put together, then I can go into shadow and pick any one of my shadows that are available. So I'm going to go to one that's easier to see, shadow 1. And you can see here, it's got this shadow applied to it. Let's do that one more time. I'm going to go in here and go to shadow test, shadow 2 test. You can see that change. The next set of styles is going to be our solid and outline colors. I recommend going to something like a color palette generator to find your palette if you're starting from scratch. It saves a lot of time of trying to figure out what colors really mix and match and go together. You can use something like coolers. There's a bunch of them out there. They all work differently. It's really up to your preference and what you need. But what I like about this one is that you can have your palette generated. I really like this kind of avocado lime color over here. You can select the code. I'm just going to copy this one. Go back to my sketch file. You can see it was a hex. And I'm going to go over here and just drop it in. Now, This is what I call solid color 1. I don't name it lime green or purple or anything like that. I give it the most generic name possible. The reason being is because if you're creating something from scratch, you might get halfway through a project and be calling something orange, and then the person who's creating that project says, you know what, our main color is no longer orange, we just switched up our logo, we're actually going to make it purple. Now you have to go and rename everything that was called orange to this new name. And once things get placed on your pages, in your layers, on your side columns, sometimes it's just set that way. It doesn't update when you update these styles. So name it generic, and you can change this color to whatever you want, and it will always still be identified as color 1. So what I like to do after that is get the same color, and I'm going to go here and update it, or update this color, paste that. I'm just going to go in and bring it towards the dark side of the spectrum, right about there is fine. I'm going to do the same thing here, paste, open that, and bring it up to make it a little brighter. Now you can see that's terrible contrast. Make sure you pay attention to those things whenever you're picking a palette. Sometimes you get a dark color as your default, and it doesn't make a difference. I'm going to go to our website demo, and you can see that the color, that purple, was applied in some of those places, some of the places on this site. I'm going to update this color, so now you see it turns to our limeish green there. I'm going to update this one, and I'm going to update this. Alright, now that I go over to the website demo, nothing's changed. We're going to go up here where it gives us a notification saying that library updates are available. It's constantly reading your other file once it's updated. It says something's changed, we need to change as well. So we're going to go to update this library. And I've been working for a while, so a number of things have changed. So we're going to update components, and those colors should come with. You see that? So everything that was that purple before, not including this because that's a gradient, that we applied specific to our overlay. We didn't change our overlays. It's changed in here. But again, always stay in the mindset of if you have 100 pages that you have to go through and change the color for, you've just done that in one step, and it's still identified as the light, dark, or default variant of color 1. Super generic names. So I'm just going to go back and undo this. I'm going to save this. Go to our website demo. Alright, so we're going to go in and go to library updates, update the components that have changed, and you see it's back to the way it was. Total control at a global level. So the colors you want to add are color 1, 2, and 3. You get more colors from a color palette. You may get more colors from a color palette. I don't think you need all of these. You may have some as accent colors or something to use in the future, but pick the 2 or 3 that will be your main colors. Of course, if you want to add more, you can always just say color 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever you want. The next thing is our neutrals. You always want to have neutrals for things like outlines, text, text colors, and so on, and then your notifications for errors. These you do want these to typically be different and standardized for your applications. For example, you don't want your error text to necessarily rely on there being a red or part of the color palette because there may not be red. So pick your standard notification colors. These are built the same way as shadows and filters, so I'm not going to go through all the details, but just to give you a kind of a review of it. You create your color, your shape, change your style to whatever you want it to be. In this case, we'll go back to the green. I believe this is still in it. We're going to remove the borders, and that's all we want. We'll do color, solid, mark in the name, test, and this will be our default. Enter. And boom. Now underneath our color, solid, we have a new folder called color test and default. Outlines, same thing. You're going to create your shape, oval, create that. Remove the fill. Keep the border as whatever you want it to be. I recommend just going up to the top, selecting your layer, copying the hex code, copy, going down here, and then pasting it. These are all set to default. I know I grabbed the dark, but grab your whatever the default is and paste that in. Now you can see it's the same color. Create your style, and then call it whatever your naming convention is. So in our case, it's outline, theme, and color 1. So I just say outline / theme / color 1 test. There you go. Outline, theme, color 1 test. I'm going to delete this. Are you sure you want to delete this layer style? Make sure if you ever see this, you know for sure that there's nothing important using your styles, because it will detach them. It won't get rid of them, but it will detach them from the symbol. So as you do updates in the future, those elements that got detached will not update. So yes, go ahead and delete this. Delete. All right. The last thing is text, your typography. So this can actually be a really complicated process to create all these and create new styles for every single one. It can seem very daunting, but I would suggest going to a plugin called Rename It. As you can see right here, Rename It, and just follow the steps on there, and it's really simple. You just create your text layers, H1 through H6 in this case. You specify things like the font family, your weight, your size, line height, all these different things. Yeah, even alignment, and then have them all left aligned. Then you create another group by just going over, I'll show you here. You would just grab these, copy it over, make them all centered. Then you have your centered aligned, and then copy it again and right align all of them. So in this case, it's already done. And then you'll go to your Rename It plugin and adjust all of them at once. I highly suggest you check that out before this demo. We're not going to look at the details here. So this is a lot of information to take in. How do you use it? The last thing we're going to do in this episode is build a new symbol that uses all of these styles, plus a couple of atoms that we're going to create.
The component we're going to be building is an input field. And in order to do this, we need to have a couple symbols that are not included in our styles, and I'll show you how to build that now. So we're going to go to our rectangle tool, and we're just going to drag this out. Let's make it 75. Size doesn't really matter in this case because this is just going to help us define what that shape is, what the characteristics of it are, and so we just need to make sure it's large enough to see on the screen. So what I'm going to do here for our content container is remove the border, and I'm going to give this a corner radius of 8. All right, so just a square with a corner radius, nothing unique about it or special about it. I'm going to actually make this a little larger, and we're going to duplicate this twice. So when you're building a component like a container style, if you want to apply a shadow separately from an outline and then separately from a color, have those all as unique attributes that you can adjust and change at a global level, you have to build them on separate layers. So essentially we have one layer on the bottom that's going to be shadow, another layer above that that's going to be the color, and another layer on top of all those that's going to be an outline. So this allows you to adjust those manually and individually, and we're going to go ahead and apply the styles that we created before. So remember, shadow, you won't be able to see here very well because it's on a dark background and the shadow is dark. So we're going to go in here, this document, shadow, and we got to get rid of these other ones. And we're going to go to shadow 2. So you see it disappeared. You can see it's a little different on the screen than the pure black because it has a transparency, but you'll be able to see it more in a little bit here. The next layer is going to be our color layer. And so we're going to apply this document, color, and solid, neutral, and white. So we'll select that. And now it was white before and it looks the same, but you'll notice over here, now we have that style applied. So if we ever go and say, you know what, we don't want our white to be a pure white, we want it to be a cream white or an off white or something like that, then everything that has a style applied will also change to that color. The last thing we want to apply that we just created is our style outline. Actually, let's go over to neutral and go over to none. So just like the shadow, we had a none. For your neutral outlines, you want to have a none as well. And the reason is because by default, you may not necessarily want to show an outline. If you do want an outline, then select the one that you want to be in your input field or your content container by default. But you'll find in a lot of cases when you're just trying to give something a background, you may not want that outline, and so you'll find yourself having to remove it every time you place a content container. So it's easier to start without it and add it in the times that you need it. So we're going to apply none here, and we're going to overlap these layers. So let's just take this and align them together. So now what you have, it looks like a single item. They're the exact same. If I move this around, it's just going to look like one square. But we're going to create a symbol. Let's see. And we're going to call this atoms container round. And there you go. So now we have our content container, atoms container round. And like I showed you earlier, you can't see anything, but when I hover over it, you can see this blue outline. And when we go over to our layers, we see, make sure I have the right one, they're all the same, but the top layer is an outline, the middle layer is a color, and the bottom layer is a shadow. So let's kind of see this in practice here. So we'll go back to our document. We're going to delete this, and we're going to create a little canvas for us to work with. There we go. And we're going to insert, document, atoms, container, round. And you'll see now with a white background, you can see that there's this container that I can adjust, move around. It has a shadow. And let's zoom in here and see the shadow outline. We can change this to anything we want. So let's change it to neutral 2. And now you have an outline. We can click this and go to our color. And this is where that naming convention comes into play. See, this is simple, clean, outline, color, shadow. So there you have it. Now we have our content container. And you can see it has the outline option where you can adjust this and change it to whatever you want it to be. We have the color where we can change that to a different color. And we have the shadow where we can change this to whatever shadow we want, shadow 1, 2, or 3. So this gives you full flexibility to go in and adjust this container. And when you have this applied everywhere, your style becomes consistent. So the last thing we're going to do is make this the size that we want it to be. In this case, we're going to make it 400 width, 400 pixels wide, and we're going to make it 40 pixels tall. I'm going to move this over into the corner and adjust my artboard to the container. There you go. Bring this up just a little bit since we don't need that much room. The next thing I'm going to do is add an icon. So to build an icon, now that we've created this symbol, we need to go in and create an icon symbol. I'm going to create an artboard, and I'm going to make this 24 by 24. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to drop an icon in here. So to create our icon, I would suggest going to a website that already has a library of icons available. There's so many of them. Just Google icon library. You can use Envato. You can use, in this case, a sketch file that came from just a free library of icons. This is called Magicon. And I'm going to go in here and grab one of these. So I'm going to grab this pencil here, and I'm going to go into the layers and make sure I just copy that. I don't want this pencil icon outline slice layer that they have. Copy that. Go back to my demo. I'm sorry. Go back to my library. I'm going to paste it, and there you have it. You have an icon. Now, the one thing that's about this icon, you have to pay attention. When you bring in something from other documents, it will bring in the styles within add that style. We don't want other styles in there because it'll make our document messy. So you see it has this icon color style that was applied. You don't want that. So let's click this, go into our styles, and go into our document. We'll go into colors, solid, neutral, and I prefer a dark gray for my icons, at least as the default. And I'm going to go over to this icon color and delete it. All right. Now, it's not going to show up in our icon options because we haven't made it a symbol yet. So if you just move this over into your input field, and then you decide, you know what, that pencil doesn't look right. I actually want it to have more of a square top eraser, or I want to add a little color into the middle of that eraser, make it a little red, add a little pop. Well, you would have to do that to every single placement. In this case, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to that we did for the content container. We're going to go to create symbol, atoms, because this is the smallest element that we can get, icons, and we're going to do pencil test. All right, we're going to create this. And now, when we go back to our symbols, and now when I double click it, it takes me right to the library, the symbols page where this is placed. The last thing we're going to do is give it the container height and width that the other ones have, which is 24 by 24. And we're going to center this icon. I'm going to change this so that it doesn't change size. And we're going to center it. Perfect. All right. Now we're going to go back to our instance. And this, we're going to just delete. We're going to replace it. Insert, document, atoms, icons. And then we're going to go to pencil test. There it is. I'm going to hold shift and left arrow key. That's going to put it 16 pixels away from the side. That is where I determine that by the shift, the amount of pixels that moves when holding shift and arrow keys. By going to preference, canvas, nudging, move objects 1 pixel. When using arrow keys, move objects 8 pixels. using shift arrow keys. By default, this is 10, but I work on 8 pixel grids, grids divisible by 8 pixels. So I have to switch that over, otherwise things start getting kind of out of whack. It's a lot easier to shift things by standard amounts of 8, 16, 32, and just hitting, counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Shift 1, 2, 3, 4 arrow. All right. The last stylized element that we need to add in here is text. So let's add a text layer. And we're just going to say type your text. Actually, let's lowercase that. Type your text here. You can label this whatever you want, as long as it's clear to the person who's using this that this is what's supposed to happen with this text area. So we're going to move that in 16 pixels as well. So we're going to go over to our text styles. Notice there's none currently. We're going to go to this document, desktop and tablet. This is how I've named my layers. We're going to go to body, dark, and left, and regular. So now you have all the components that you need for the input and the styles. And so we're also going to go down here and duplicate this. I'm going to cut this down 15 and bring this in just a bit here. So now keep in mind, this is not fully dynamic. This is for display purposes to give a developer to build. So I'm going to put some text in here, but it's not necessarily going to be fully functional, or it won't necessarily adjust with the text that's in this container. So I want this to be just a little ways away from the container above it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 nudges. And this is going to house our informational text. So we're going to get our text layer again here. We're going to type, and we're going to type in informational text. All right. Align that. Make sure that's a little early. Caption, dark, left, regular. Perfect. Now we're going to give this a little color. I'm going to go to our colors, this document, solid, neutral, notifications, and give it error. So the reason that we wanted to pick those standard error notification colors is because of this mostly. So we can go in here and say, you know what? I want to display what something looks like with a success text and the error message, and this is what it's going to look like. This is just a design specific to my preferences. You can make it look however you want. So to make this text a little bit more visible, I'm going to go down to this document, desktop, tablet, caption, light instead of dark, and I'm going to go to left and regular. So now we have our content container, we have the text, we have an icon, we have the informational text for if something's successful or fails, and then we can bring this up, and there we go. Now we have multiple components and multiple styles. The last thing we need to do is make this a symbol itself. So we're going to right click on this whole artboard. So we're going to take it, now that we have everything fitted the way that we want it, we're going to select it and move it out of the artboard, because we can't have an artboard be part of our styles. We're going to right click on it, select everything and right click and go to create symbol. So this is going to get the name molecules input default. Now these namings can get very complex because of variations. If you have molecules input default, that usually means there's going to be other versions. And in my case, as I've built this, I've found that there are some instances where I want the label to be on the top, and I need to identify that version. There's instances where there's an icon on the left and an icon on the right, which requires its own spacing, and that requires its own naming. There are instances where I have small versions of the input for mobile, and then there are times where I have a little bit larger sizes for desktop. So with all these different variations, we're not going to get into the naming right now. We're going to keep it really simple, and we're just going to call this molecules input default. All right, so we're going to create that. And now you see how it took us right to the document. I'm in my styles page, and because now this is a recognized symbol, you can tell by this little rotating arrows icon, molecules input default. If I ever want to go in and edit that instance, I double click and it takes me to my library where all of the other symbols are. In this case, it just happened to place it with the other ones with a similar name, so that's convenient. So let's see this in practice. I'm going to make an adjustment here. Move that text up just a little bit. And this is what I meant by having all the other variations. These are my default ones, which control these other versions. Very powerful stuff. We'll get into that later when we talk about input specifically. You have a variation over here with a button on the right. You have the one with the outside label and one with no outside label. All right, so the last thing is making it responsive. So right now, if I were to just expand this artboard and I have adjust content on a resize to see if it's working properly, you'll see that things kind of get out of whack, right? This is no longer 16 spacing. This isn't 16 spacing. This is extended unexpectedly. The content container actually stayed the way it should be. So we need to adjust each one of these elements so that they work properly. I'm going to select our content container, which is our input, and I'm going to go up to this resizing area, and I'm going to align it to the top. So let's see how each one of these settings work. If I pull down, you see this content container extends. So it does align to the top, but I want it to intentionally align to the top, and I want it to not extend in height. It should always be the same height input container. So now that I've said don't extend the height, you can see everything else moves and it stays put. If I go this way, it moves along. That's the default behaviors for some reason, but right now I'm going to make it intentional. You see this went away because I'm telling it to align to the right of the document and align to the left of, align to the right of the artboard and align to the left of the artboard. So now, no matter how much we move this around, it's going to stay at the top and align to the left and the right of the container and contain and keep its height. Next, I want to get this icon to stay in the same place. So icons should never change height or width. So I'm going to select the middle of this fixed size. And now it will definitely never change or skew or anything. But I also want it to stay aligned to the right of the document. So I'm going to do that. You see when I extend it, the artboard to the right, it goes with it. That spacing remains. If I bring it down though, however, it still leaves the place that it's supposed to stay in the input. So I'm going to select it one more time and I'm going to say align it to the top of the artboard. So now it's correct there and it's correct here. So you just have to go through this bit by bit and make sure everything's aligning the way you want it. So I'm going to speed through this a little bit. I want this to maintain top alignment and left of the artboard. So we're just going to stick with auto width. And we want to adjust this to the width that we definitely want it to stay on our container. I like to give the amount of spacing that I want it to stay from the element on the furthest right, in this case the icon. So I pull it all the way to the edge. See, it snaps. And then I go to width and I say -8. So now when I type in here, it'll go all the way to that point before it breaks. And because we want it to maintain that spacing between the icon and everything else, between the text container and the icon, we're going to say align right. So now just like the icon, it's staying this distance away from the right of the canvas of the artboard. So if I extend it over here, it maintains that spacing. We're going to do that last thing here. We're going to actually make these two items just fixed for now, but we do want to align it to the left and to the top. And now we need to adjust the text. We're going to say stay fixed, align left and top. Now, when we adjust this, doesn't matter what we do with the height, everything stays in place. That's our breakpoint. So now let's see this in practice. We're going to go over to our file over here I've titled inputs. And we're going to create an artboard. Just make this wide enough. We're going to insert, document, molecules, input, and default. We're going to place this right in the middle. So what seems like a long investment, time-intensive investment to create what could be done in a matter of minutes, begs the question of why would I spend this much time creating something that I could do in a few minutes? Again, always keep the mindset of imagine if there were 50 and somebody wanted you to make a change. If you just copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste, when you need to make a change, for example, rounded corners or shadows or icon colors or the icon itself or text styles, you have to do it every single instance. You don't want to spend time doing that. So now, instead of clicking the individual element, we just click the symbol, and we have over on the right a number of overrides. Type your text here. Very cool. This is your new text. Updates. I can copy and paste this now, and I can say this one's going to be type your name. Actually, we'll give this another one. Phone, make it a little bit more realistic. And email. Then we're going to go to this one. It's this one in our override shadow 1. You can see we have for our atom, it's identified atoms, container, round. We have our outline, color, and shadow. So I'm going to give this a shadow 1 just to show you the flexibility of how you can make 3 of the same component look totally different. And I'm going to go to outline, notifications, error. And I'm going to make my icon, the color, solid, notifications, error. For this one, I'm going to give it a shadow 2, shadow 3. And I'm going to give it, for its atoms container round, an outline, one of the theme colors would be nice. For whatever reason, that's a business decision to define when something outlines with a color, why is it outlining that way? It doesn't always have to be standard colors. In a recent update for Sketch, I can actually go in and just click the individual icon. If this view is too confusing and it's too much to read, I'm used to it now. I know what I'm looking for. But you can also hold Command and click a specific layer. And then you have the options that are specific to that layer. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change this to colors, solid, notification, success. And you can see it goes on. I can even change this to whatever I want it to be. Now remember, like I said before, you can change this to whatever. You can, any option in here that it gives you, you can change it to that. However, you want to stick to some rules, define some rules of what it can and can't be. So we're just going to change this to info. Full control at a granular level. One thing I didn't show was you can change this to bold. Change any piece of this. Or make this so there you have it. We have an input field that is responsive when I adjust the content and adjust appropriately. You can change outlines, colors, shadows, your text. Oh, and the last thing, whenever you have an icon that's the exact same size or a symbol that's the exact same size, you can interchange it by going in here, clicking your symbol, doing your drop down, and it'll allow you to change it to anything that is the exact same size. So I'm going to click this cancel button. And you see it maintained the same color and it changed the symbol to close or cancel. So there you have it. That's everything that you could possibly do with using symbols and styles and creating a component that is fully flexible and able to be changed at a global level. I'm going to go here and just as a reminder of what this looked like when I started, refresh everything. There you go. Those default styles. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you guys get an opportunity to go out and play with these symbols and styles and atoms in yourself. Make sure you take in consideration your naming convention. Make sure it's very organized because you have to deal with so many layers over time. It gets extremely messy very fast. But as long as you have some kind of strategy when you go into it, then it should be very easy to navigate through all your layers, your symbols, and your other options. So my name is Victor. Make sure you subscribe and follow me for the rest of these episodes that I'm going to be having to create the entire design system library from scratch. Thank you.